Welcome to the Sci-Fi Alien channel, where the boundaries of the universe are constantly pushed and the most extraordinary tales unfold. Today, we dive into a thrilling story that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about trust, betrayal, and love in a galaxy far beyond our own. James, a seasoned mercenary, thought he was simply striking a deal when he accepted an alien woman as payment for a rare artifact. But this wasn't just any captive. Cara, with her violet skin and silver eyes, wasn't a slave. She was the princess of an ancient and powerful royal family, hidden in plain sight. What began as a transaction soon turned into something far more dangerous, as Cara revealed the shocking truth of her escape from a corrupt empire. As James and Cara forged an unbreakable bond through a mysterious, otherworldly connection, their journey became one of rebellion, love, and untold power. But the stakes grew higher when James's trusted engineer, Cara, betrayed them, sabotaging their ship and selling them out to the royal guard. Now, they are not just running from their enemies, they are facing betrayal from within their own crew. Will they survive the royal guard's wrath and tear down the empire that betrayed them? How will their newfound connection shape the future of their worlds, and can James and Cara trust each other in the face of such treachery? Stay with us as we unravel this electrifying tale of love, power, and survival. The question remains, can love truly defy all odds, even when the universe itself seems determined to tear it apart? James Red Walker had seen the darkest corners of the universe. A seasoned mercenary, his life was built on contracts, dangerous jobs, and the pursuit of cold, hard credits. In the black market, where nothing was ever what it seemed, every deal had its price, whether in money, trust, or something far more valuable. James had accepted more than his fair share of risky assignments, but none would change his life like this one. It all began in the underbelly of the galaxy, on a forsaken station in the dead of space, a place where shady traders, smugglers, and desperate souls gathered. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burned circuits and the stale scent of synthetic alcohol, the kind that burned your throat and left a metallic taste on your tongue. The lights flickered above, casting a sickly glow over the scene as James stood at the counter of a grubby merchant. His towering figure, draped in black combat armor, gleamed faintly under the flickering neon lights, a stark contrast to the dingy surroundings. He was a man of few words, but he had a reputation that spoke volumes. His actions spoke louder than any words ever could. The deal seemed simple enough. A rare quantum phase modulator, a piece of tech that could fetch a fortune. It was the kind of high-value item James had fought tooth and nail to secure. But when the merchant laid out the terms, the offer grew more unusual by the second. The merchant, a gray-skinned alien named Krath, had something else in mind, a human woman standing off to the side, her shackles glinting under the dim lights. Krath's voice, grating and disjointed, broke through James's concentration. "This, my friend, is your payment," he said with a smirk that seemed to stretch across his face. "A rare specimen, pure Etherean. A slave from the Century raids. She's yours, free of charge, in exchange for the modulator." James's brow furrowed as he glanced at the woman. She stood still, her violet skin and silver eyes sharp and haunting. Her expression, though resigned, held a certain quiet strength that sent a shiver down James's spine. There was something otherworldly about her, something he couldn't quite place. But a slave? She didn't look like any slave he had ever seen. "You want me to take a slave as payment?" James growled, his thick, dark beard betraying the annoyance that crept into his voice. "I don't deal in people. Not like this." Krath's multifaceted eyes narrowed, a flicker of amusement crossing his features. Consider it a bonus. You're getting something you won't find anywhere else. Her abilities are worth more than the tech she comes with. Take her, and you get not only the modulator but a powerful asset. A deal you won't regret, my friend. James's hand instinctively tightened around the hilt of his rifle. He was no stranger to black market dealings or ruthless merchants, but this was different. There was something about the way the woman stood, something that spoke of untold stories. Her gaze was steady, not of fear or submission, but of calculated intelligence. She wasn't begging for freedom, she wasn't pleading for rescue. She was waiting. He couldn't ignore the sense of unease that crept over him. Every fiber of his being told him to turn away, but something, some deeper instinct, compelled him to take a closer look. "Fine," James said, reluctantly. "But I want in writing that she's free the moment the transaction is complete. No exceptions." Krath grinned wider. Of course. You're a man of honor, I can tell." The documents were signed, and the deal was done. But as Krath turned away to gather the final details, something inside James clicked. This wasn't a simple transaction anymore. This wasn't just about tech or credits. It was about the woman, Cara, standing beside him. The mysterious, beautiful woman with the haunting silver eyes. "You're free now." James's voice was quieter than he intended, his gaze locking with hers. "You can go wherever you want. I'm not your new master." She studied him for a moment, the faintest of smiles curving her lips. "My name is Cara, and I think I'll stay with you for now." The words sent a ripple through James's chest, though he didn't fully understand why. It wasn't just curiosity. There was something in the way she said it. Something almost knowing. As if her choice was more than a simple one. It was planned, calculated. And that intrigued him more than anything. The silence between them was thick with the weight of their newfound partnership. James, a battle-hardened mercenary who had learned to trust no one, felt an inexplicable pull toward this stranger, a woman who was more than just a captive or a mere asset. There was a story here, and James had a feeling it was one he wasn't going to be able to ignore. Cara's presence on the ship was strange, like a shadow that followed him, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't just a burden. She wasn't weak. She wasn't broken. There was a quiet power in her that James had only glimpsed, and that power was growing. As they departed the station and the stars stretched out before them, James couldn't help but wonder, who was she really? What had she been through? And why, out of all the places in the galaxy, had she ended up here, in this unremarkable corner of the universe, with him? The ship, the Iron Spirit, hummed beneath them as the stars flickered outside, but James was lost in thought. The deal was done, but the journey was just beginning. And with Cara by his side, everything he thought he knew about the universe was about to be turned upside down. The choice James made in that moment, accepting Cara as payment instead of rejecting her as just another pawn, would go on to shape the course of the galaxy's future. What began as a seemingly simple transaction for a piece of tech had unleashed a series of events that would challenge everything James had ever believed about trust, loyalty, and love. The unexpected consequences of this decision would push both James and Cara to their limits, testing not only their strengths but their hearts. As they ventured deeper into a world of political intrigue and hidden power, James would discover that Cara wasn't just another alien woman, she was the key to an uprising. And, much to his surprise, he wasn't merely a mercenary in this fight. He was her partner, and in their combined strength, they would challenge the foundations of the universe's power structures, one planet at a time. The truth about Cara came to light slowly, like a veil being lifted from a face, revealing something hidden, something beautiful yet terrifying in its revelation. James had never imagined that his simple transaction, one born of necessity and practicality, would be the doorway to a world so much more complex, and certainly not one where he would find himself intertwined with a figure of such incredible power. At first, Cara appeared to be just another pawn in a transaction that James had no intention of becoming emotionally involved in. A slave, as Kraft had described her, a piece of merchandise to be traded for a quantum phase modulator. But as the days passed, and as they journeyed through the vast stretches of space aboard the Iron Spirit, something about her refused to remain ordinary. Her silence was unsettling, her composure unsettlingly calm. Her beauty, though undeniably captivating, was overshadowed by a depth in her eyes that spoke volumes without uttering a single word. James, who had dealt with countless beings, soldiers, thieves, smugglers, and mercenaries, knew when something didn't add up, and he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that this was no simple situation. The truth began to unravel in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Cara wasn't like any slave he had encountered before. She wasn't broken, nor did she show the typical signs of someone who had been subjugated. There was no visible fear in her eyes, no overwhelming desire to please or escape. No. Instead, there was something else, strength. A quiet, hidden power that seemed to grow with each passing day. It wasn't until they were deep into their journey, far from the familiar, that James saw a glimpse of the real Cara. They had docked at a space station on the outskirts of the known galaxy, an abandoned research outpost, forgotten by time and most records. As James prepared for another routine check of the systems, Cara surprised him. She was standing at the edge of the ship's observation deck, staring out into the vast emptiness of space, her violet skin glowing faintly under the dim lights of the station. "You've been quiet," James said, leaning against the doorway, his tone casual, but his gaze never left her. "Everything all right?" Cara turned to face him, her silver eyes reflecting the distant stars, as though she had just returned from another world. "I've always been quiet, James. Silence is, sometimes, the only protection we have." It was then that James saw it, the flicker of something more, something regal, something unearthly in her demeanor. She wasn't just a survivor, she was someone who had been forced into hiding, someone who had been living beneath a false identity. He knew then that she was no ordinary woman. He was about to ask another question when she spoke again, her voice softer this time, laced with a trace of sadness. "I suppose it's time for you to know the truth," she said, almost as though she had been waiting for this moment. "James. I'm not who you think I am." He straightened up, confusion flickering across his face. "What do you mean?" Cara took a deep breath, her fingers brushing her hair back in a familiar, almost absent motion. "I'm not a slave. I never was. I am the heir to the Etherean throne, the royal family of a civilization much older than anything you've seen in this galaxy. I wasn't captured, James. I was hidden. I arranged my own captivity. I wanted to escape my destiny, and I knew it would be the only way." James's mind raced as the words sank in. "You're a princess." Cara nodded, the weight of her revelation settling into the silence between them. "Yes. I was raised in the palace, trained to rule, surrounded by courtly intrigues and political games. But it wasn't the life I wanted. The royal court I escaped from is corrupt, built on manipulation and power struggles. The people who should have been my protectors became my captors. I had to leave, James. I had to get out." James felt a wave of disbelief wash over him. It wasn't the revelation itself that shocked him. He had suspected something was off, had even thought she might be more than what she seemed. But the magnitude of her words, the weight of her truth, was something he hadn't prepared for. She wasn't just a prisoner in the traditional sense. She had been playing a dangerous game all along, a game of survival. But it was more than that. Cara's escape wasn't a simple act of rebellion, it was an act of courage. A decision to abandon everything she knew, to hide in plain sight, and to seek a life outside of the expectations of a throne she never wanted to sit upon. "I thought you were going to say something else," James murmured, the full scope of her predicament finally hitting him. "I thought you were going to tell me you needed me to help you get back to the palace. That you wanted to reclaim your throne." Cara smiled, though it was a bitter smile, one touched with sadness. "I don't want the throne, James. Not the way they've corrupted it. What I wanted was freedom, a life where I wasn't defined by bloodlines or politics. A life where I could make my own choices. That's why I've kept this hidden for so long." Her eyes met his, and for the first time, James saw not just a woman in hiding, but a leader, a woman who had escaped a life of control to fight for a cause much bigger than herself. "So, what now?" James asked, his voice soft but full of curiosity. "What do you want from me?" Cara paused, the weight of his question hanging in the air. "What I want from you is simple, James," she said, her voice steady, yet fierce. "I need your help to bring down the people who turned my life into a cage. I can't do this alone. But together, we can bring change. We can take back what was stolen from me and from everyone who has suffered under the Empire." James took a deep breath, feeling the enormity of her words settle around him. He had come into this expecting a typical mercenary job, one filled with risks and rewards. What he didn't expect was to find himself standing next to a woman who wasn't just a princess but a revolutionary. Cara's true identity was the beginning of something far bigger than either of them could have imagined. Her hidden royal bloodline, once a secret, was now the key to a battle that would change the fate of entire civilizations. But what truly struck James was that, despite her regal lineage, despite the immense power at her fingertips, Cara didn't seek power. She sought freedom, for herself and for the people who had been oppressed by the empire she had escaped from. As their eyes met in that moment, James realized something else. This wasn't just about saving her from a throne she never wanted. This was about helping her build something new. And in that moment, he wasn't just a mercenary anymore. He was part of something far greater. Cara wasn't just a princess. She was a catalyst for change, and James was the one chosen to stand by her side as they fought for freedom in a universe that had long forgotten what it meant. The truth had been revealed, and there was no turning back now. The journey they had just begun was no longer about surviving, it was about transforming everything they had ever known. As the days passed, James and Cara's journey through the stars became more than just a means of survival. The tension between them, once marked by cautious distance, began to shift as something deeper, something unspoken, began to form between them. It wasn't just the perilous situations they faced together or the shared desire to overthrow the corrupt forces that sought to control them, it was something far more profound, a connection. It started quietly, like a whisper between the two of them, unnoticed at first. But it quickly grew stronger, undeniable in its intensity. James had always been a man of action, a mercenary who relied on physical strength and quick decisions to see him through even the most dangerous of encounters. He had no time for distractions, no room for weakness. His life had been defined by missions, tasks that were meant to be completed without attachments or hesitation. But when he looked at Cara, he couldn't help but feel that something was beginning to change in him. Cara, too, had been trained to maintain her composure, to always appear in control of her emotions. Raised as the heir to a throne she had never wanted, she had learned to mask her true self behind a carefully constructed facade. The woman James had first met was a survivor, someone who had learned to hide her vulnerability and to trust no one. But beneath the surface, there was a different story. Cara had never allowed herself to be loved, not truly, not in the way that her heart yearned for. And now, in the company of this mercenary, this outsider who had seen the darkest corners of the universe, she found something she had never known she needed: trust. It wasn't just physical attraction that began to bind them, nor was it simply a shared desire for revenge. It was the unseen forces at work, the bond that had begun to form between them, a bond far deeper and more powerful than either of them had ever anticipated. This was no ordinary connection. It was something extraordinary, a quantum bond. At first, neither James nor Cara understood the true nature of what was happening. It started subtly, an inexplicable sense of each other's presence, a feeling of being connected even when they were miles apart. The bond wasn't just an emotional pull, it was energy, raw, primal, and vast. They felt each other's emotions, their fears, their desires. Cara could feel James's strength, his will to fight, and she found herself empowered by it, as if his determination was coursing through her veins. And James, despite his usual skepticism, began to feel something deep inside him, something he couldn't ignore. Cara's presence didn't just calm him, it made him stronger, sharper, more attuned to the dangers they faced. Their quantum bond went beyond the physical realm, it was a synchronization of their energies. The bond linked them in ways that transcended the boundaries of the human and the alien, the organic and the cosmic. The more they embraced it, the more they discovered that their connection wasn't merely spiritual, it was something that could alter the very fabric of the universe itself. Together, they could manipulate the forces of quantum energy, a power so vast that even the most advanced technologies could not replicate it. But this power wasn't just a tool, it was an extension of their hearts. They were no longer two separate beings. They had become one, their essences entwined in a way that felt both natural and overwhelming. As they spent more time together, the bond between them deepened, and with it, their feelings. It was no longer just about survival or the fight against the forces that sought to control them. It was about something much more profound, the shared strength they found in one another. There were moments when James felt the weight of this new reality, the realization that his heart, his very soul, was no longer entirely his own. When he looked at Cara, when their eyes met, he felt an undeniable pull. And it wasn't just physical. He felt her emotions as if they were his own. He felt her fears, her doubts, her hopes for a future she had long abandoned. And, most powerfully, he felt her love. A love that was unspoken but undeniable. Cara, too, found herself overwhelmed by the power of their connection. For the first time in her life, she didn't have to hide. She didn't have to keep her true feelings locked away behind the walls of a royal facade. With James, she could be herself, raw, vulnerable, and yet stronger than she had ever been before. She found herself trusting him in a way that went beyond words, beyond logic. Their connection was a bridge that spanned the gap between two worlds, between two people who had once thought they were alone in their struggles. Now, they were partners, not just in battle, but in life. And as the days turned into weeks, as they fought together, side by side, their bond became something more than just a source of power. It became a living entity in its own right. Together, they could feel the energy of the universe itself, a shared understanding of the world that defied all logic. Their bond was a constant hum between them, a rhythm that synced their hearts and their minds. When one was in pain, the other felt it. When one experienced joy, the other could sense it. And in the moments of silence, when the galaxy seemed to stretch endlessly before them, they could still hear each other's thoughts, feel each other's presence. The power they shared wasn't just a weapon. It was a reflection of their deepest selves. It was love, not in the conventional sense, but in the purest form possible. A love forged not from simple affection or attraction, but from a shared experience, an experience that transcended both their physical forms. They were no longer separate. They had become two halves of the same whole. James, for all his hardened exterior, found himself changed by this connection. The man who had lived a life defined by detachment, by the relentless pursuit of contracts, now felt a pull that was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the power he felt coursing through him, it was Cara, her energy, her presence, her love. And with each passing day, he realized something he hadn't allowed himself to believe before: he was capable of love, a love that transcended everything he had once known. For Cara, the quantum bond was a revelation. She had been trained to rule, to control, to manipulate. But with James, she discovered that the true strength of a leader was in her vulnerability, in her ability to trust. This bond, this deep connection, was more than she could have ever imagined. It was freedom, freedom from the shackles of her royal birthright, freedom from the chains of expectation, and freedom to love without fear. Together, they realized that their bond wasn't just about survival. It was about power, kind of power that could change the galaxy, reshape entire civilizations, and bring freedom to those who had been silenced for too long. Their love, their bond, was not just a force that connected them, it was a weapon, one that could bring down empires and create a new future for all species. In each other, they had found strength, but more than that, they had found a future. Together, they would fight not just for their own survival, but for something greater, a future built on the foundation of their bond, their love, and the infinite potential that lay within them both. As the journey between James and Cara unfolded, so did the realization that their bond wasn't just about survival, it was about something far more significant. With each passing day, their fight grew from a mere struggle for their own freedom to a battle for justice. What started as an escape from a corrupt system soon became a mission to dismantle that very system, to bring down the empire that had stolen not only Cara's birthright but the lives of millions. James had always been a mercenary, someone who fought for money, for contracts, for the thrill of battle. He had never been one to question the systems of power that ruled the galaxy. He did what he was paid to do, no more, no less. But now, with Cara by his side, everything had changed. She had opened his eyes to a world he had long overlooked, a world filled with oppression, manipulation, and injustice. The power that her royal family wielded wasn't used to protect or empower. It was used to control, to crush, to suppress. Cara, who had spent her entire life inside the walls of a palace, surrounded by the weight of her royal destiny, had never known freedom until now. Her entire life had been a string of calculated moves, all meant to keep her in line, to make her a puppet of those who thought they had the right to control her. The corruption within the royal court had poisoned everything she had ever known. The nobles, the military leaders, the advisors, they were all part of a system designed to maintain their power at any cost. And now, Cara could no longer sit idly by. She had to act. She had to fight. The decision to fight was not made lightly. The stakes were higher than either of them had imagined. They were not just up against the royal court, but against a deep, entrenched web of corruption that spanned the entire galaxy. It was a system that had been built over centuries, one that thrived on exploitation and fear. Cara knew that challenging it meant more than just overthrowing a few corrupt officials. It meant tearing down everything and starting anew. It meant risking everything, her life, her title, her legacy, for a chance at creating a new future for the galaxy. James, despite his initial reluctance, found himself caught up in this cause. He was no longer just the hired gun, the outsider. He was a partner in the rebellion, fighting alongside someone he had come to love, someone who had shown him that there was more to life than just survival. The war for justice became personal. It was no longer about money or fame, it was about fighting for the people who had been oppressed for far too long. It was about bringing down a system that had crushed the spirit of millions for generations. And that fight, that battle for justice, became their shared purpose. Cara's voice, once silenced by the court, was now the voice of revolution. She had longed for freedom, but what she now sought was much bigger. She wanted to break the chains that bound everyone, not just herself. And James, though he had never considered himself a revolutionary, found himself believing in her cause. He saw in her the same determination and strength that he had once admired in himself, but now, it was amplified by something deeper, love. Together, they began to gather allies. They sought out those who had been wronged by the royal court, those who had lost everything to the corruption that ran deep in the fabric of the empire. They met in secret, in hidden corners of the galaxy where the eyes of the ruling class couldn't reach. Slowly, their numbers grew. First, it was just a few rebels here and there, people who were willing to risk everything for a better future. But as they spread the word, their movement grew, and more joined their cause. The oppressed, the forgotten, the silenced, they all came together, united by a single vision, a vision of freedom. The journey was not without its sacrifices. They faced constant threats from the royal guard, mercenaries hired to hunt them down, spies planted within their ranks. But with each victory, no matter how small, their resolve grew stronger. Every battle fought, every plan executed, brought them one step closer to their ultimate goal, exposing the heart of the empire and bringing its corrupt leaders to justice. As the revolution gained momentum, they began to infiltrate the heart of the royal court. They uncovered evidence of illegal dealings, abuses of power, and the systemic oppression that had kept entire populations in the dark. The royal family was not just a symbol of authority, it was the root of the corruption, and its power extended far beyond Cara's own bloodline. The court's influence had spread like a disease throughout the galaxy, infiltrating every level of government, military, and society. But it was Cara's blood, her legacy, that they feared the most. She was their heir, the one person who could bring everything crashing down. Every step they took brought them closer to the heart of the system. They exposed the lies that had been woven for centuries. The royal court's wealth was built on the backs of the oppressed. Entire planets had been drained of their resources to maintain the lavish lifestyle of the ruling class. Cara's family, the ones who had once been viewed as divine rulers, were no better than criminals. They had sold the lives of their people for the sake of power and greed. But as they prepared for the final confrontation, James and Cara knew that their actions would have consequences. Exposing the truth was just the beginning. The court wouldn't go down without a fight, and they had made enemies who would stop at nothing to maintain their control. The rebellion had become a war, one that would reshape the galaxy and challenge the very nature of power itself. It was in these final days that James realized the true cost of justice. Victory was never guaranteed, and the price they had to pay for the freedom of the galaxy was steep. But as he stood by Cara's side, watching the final battle unfold, he understood that they had done more than just bring down a corrupt regime. They had given people hope. They had shown the universe that corruption could be defeated, that change was possible, and that even the smallest voice could spark a revolution. Cara had set out to free herself from the chains of the throne, but what she had done was far more than that. She had sparked a movement that had shaken the foundations of the empire. And now, as the sun set on the ruins of the royal court, a new world was being born, one where justice, freedom, and equality would reign. Together, James and Cara had not just fought for their own future, they had fought for the future of everyone. And in the end, their fight was not just about overthrowing a corrupt empire. It was about creating a world where no one would ever be bound by the chains of injustice again. James had never been naive. As a mercenary, he had learned long ago to trust no one but himself. In a galaxy teeming with deception and betrayal, the only loyalty that mattered was the one he kept for himself. Yet, as his journey with Cara unfolded, something shifted within him. The connection they shared, deeper than either had anticipated, made him feel a strange sense of security, a belief that together, they could face anything. But that security, that belief, would be shattered in an instant by the greatest betrayal of all. It started as an ordinary day aboard the Iron Spirit, their ship, as they continued their journey through the uncharted sectors of space. They were far from any central system, far from the eyes of the royal court, and yet, in the vastness of space, a sense of calm had settled over them. They were making progress with their revolution, gaining allies, and taking down the small but essential outposts of the corrupt empire that had long ruled the galaxy with an iron fist. James had grown accustomed to the rhythm of their life now: battle, strategy, victories, and the quiet moments between. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form, unnoticed at first, but too significant to ignore. Cale, their engineer, had always been a steady presence on the ship. A quiet, reliable man with a rough exterior, he had proven himself time and again, repairing systems and keeping the ship running smoothly. James had never questioned Cale's loyalty. He had become, in many ways, part of their small, tight-knit crew. The bond that had formed between the team, James, Cara, Cale, and the others, felt unbreakable. At least, that was what James had believed. One evening, as they docked at a remote station for resupply, the ship suddenly shuddered violently. It was a jolt that threw James off his feet and sent him stumbling to the control panels. The lights flickered, and the alarm screamed through the ship's comms, but this wasn't a normal system malfunction. No, this was something far worse. As James quickly assessed the situation, it became clear, the ship had been compromised. The core systems, the very systems they had worked so hard to protect, were being hacked. The quantum phase modulator they relied on, the lifeblood of their ship, was now under threat. His pulse quickening, James immediately rushed to the communications room. He needed answers. As he keyed into the system, a voice crackled over the intercom, and it was a voice that made his blood run cold. It was Cale. "James. I never wanted it to go this far," Cale said, his voice shaky, regret lacing his words. "I didn't have a choice. They're coming for you. They're coming for us." James's heart sank. "What the hell are you talking about?" he demanded. There was a coldness in his voice, but inside, his mind was racing. This was the last person he ever expected to betray them. Cale had been like family, loyal, dependable. I was forced to do this, Cale continued, the guilt clear in his tone. They've been tracking us. The Royal Guard, they know about you, about what you've been doing. They said if I didn't disable the ship's systems, if I didn't give them a way in, they'd kill me, and you. I couldn't risk it, James. I'm sorry. You have to understand. James felt a sickening wave of disbelief wash over him. Cale, the man who had fought beside them, who had shared their risks and victories, was now their greatest enemy. The very person he had trusted more than anyone else had handed them over to the forces they had spent their entire lives fighting against. It wasn't just the betrayal that stung, it was the realization that someone so close had been playing them all along. I didn't think it would go this far, Cale's voice continued, almost pleading now. But they're coming, James. The Royal Guard, they'll be here soon. The transmission cut off abruptly. James stood there, frozen for a moment, the weight of the betrayal pressing down on him. This wasn't just about Cale's treachery. It was about the fact that the Royal Guard knew exactly where they were. They were being hunted, and there was no escape this time. Rage burned within him, and it wasn't just for the betrayal. It was for the lies, the deception that had been woven through their ranks. The trust he had extended to someone who had been with them from the beginning had been shattered in the worst possible way. And that realization left him feeling exposed, vulnerable. Cara appeared beside him, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. She had heard the conversation, had felt the weight of the betrayal as keenly as James. But where he felt fury, she felt a deep sadness, betrayal by one's own. For Cara, who had lived a life where every smile, every word, could hide treachery, this was a wound that cut deeper than anything else. I never thought it would be him, she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. We trusted him. I trusted him. James didn't respond at first. The anger still pulsed through him, a furious storm he couldn't control. But as he looked at Cara, he saw something else in her eyes, resilience. She was hurt, yes, but she wasn't going to let this break her. And that gave him the strength to push forward. We'll deal with him later, James said, his voice hardening. Right now, we have to focus on what comes next. We've been betrayed, but we're not done yet. We still have a fight to win. They rushed to the ship's command center, where the damage Cale had caused was already beginning to show. The ship's core systems were failing, and the Royal Guard wasn't far behind. It was clear they were prepared to strike quickly, overwhelm them before they could regroup. James and Cara worked together seamlessly, coordinating their efforts to buy themselves precious time. Cara, with her Etherean powers, could manipulate the ship's systems in ways that no one, not even the Royal Guard, had anticipated. James, though angry and hurt, kept his focus, making sure the ship remained mobile enough to evade their pursuers. As they worked, the reality of the situation hit him once more. Cale's betrayal wasn't just about one man. It was a symbol of how deep the corruption went. If someone like Cale, who had lived with them, laughed with them, fought alongside them, could be bought by the Royal Guard, then how many others in their world were compromised? How many could be bought, manipulated, turned against them? The galaxy wasn't just filled with corrupt rulers and politicians. It was filled with people like Cale, people who would choose their own survival over the lives of those who had trusted them. And in that moment, James knew that the war they were fighting wasn't just against the Royal Guard, it was against the very nature of human and alien greed, fear, and betrayal. The royal guard would come. The battle would be fierce. But James and Cara had something no one could take away from them, not even the most powerful empire. They had each other, and together, they would face whatever came next, no matter the cost. The betrayal was a hard lesson, one that would shape the rest of their journey. But it would not be the end of their story. The fight for justice, for freedom, was just beginning, and no amount of betrayal could take that away. The weight of betrayal still hung heavy in the air, but the galaxy didn't wait for their wounds to heal. The royal guard was closing in, and the ship was barely holding together after the sabotage. Yet, in that moment, amidst the chaos and the uncertainty of their future, James and Cara discovered something they had never truly understood: the power of their bond. Before this journey, James had been a man of calculated risks, a mercenary who had learned to keep his emotions in check and his distance from others. His trust had always been a commodity, something earned through actions, not words. He had spent his life in the shadows, where betrayal was just a part of the job, where alliances were as fleeting as the credits he earned. But as he stood beside Cara now, after everything they had been through, he realized that his world had changed. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about something much deeper: connection. Cara had always been defined by what others expected of her. The weight of her royal lineage had been a burden she carried for years, her every action scrutinized by a court that saw her as a tool to be used. Her father, her people, her family, all had treated her as though she were a means to an end. But with James, she found something she had never allowed herself to have before: true partnership. She was no longer a princess hiding behind walls of royal duty and expectation. With him, she could be vulnerable, and in that vulnerability, she found her greatest strength. In the early days of their relationship, their bond had been something unspoken. It had started as a whisper, a subtle connection that neither could fully comprehend. But the more they fought together, the more they realized that their bond wasn't just emotional, it was quantum. Their energies, their very essences, had intertwined in ways that defied explanation. In their shared moments of danger, their shared moments of quiet, they began to feel each other's thoughts, desires, and fears as though they were their own. It was as though their hearts beat as one, as though the universe itself had conspired to bring them together. But the true power of this bond revealed itself when everything was on the line. The royal guard was closing in fast. They had been tracked, and there was no escaping their reach. The ship was falling apart, and even Cara's remarkable powers couldn't keep up with the damage. They were out of options. The feeling of imminent doom loomed over them. And yet, in the midst of the panic, in the face of overwhelming odds, something remarkable happened. Cara, her face determined, her hands trembling from the strain, reached out to James. As their fingers touched, the energy between them surged. It was as though the universe itself recognized the power of their connection. Their bond intensified. The very air around them seemed to crackle with energy, a wave of raw force emanating from the space where their hands met. The ship's systems, which had been failing, seemed to stabilize for just a moment, as though their bond had infused the very heart of the ship with new life. James felt the rush of power surge through him, but it wasn't just his own strength he was feeling. It was Cara's power, her energy, now intertwined with his. He could feel it, a pulsing current that connected them more intimately than anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't just about physical proximity, it was about something deeper, something that went beyond the limitations of their bodies. Their bond had become a conduit, a shared source of energy, one that they could use together. The power was terrifying, in the best possible way. They were no longer just two individuals facing an enemy. They had become a single, unstoppable force. The realization hit James like a blow to the chest. Their connection, their bond, wasn't just about love, it was a force that could challenge the very fabric of the universe. It was the key to everything they had fought for. Cara's voice broke through his thoughts, steady and clear despite the tension in the air. "We can do this, James. Together, we can stop them." For the first time since this all began, James believed her. He believed in them, in the power they wielded together. The betrayal, the sabotage, it didn't matter anymore. In that moment, they had transcended everything. They were no longer fighting just for survival or for revenge. They were fighting for a future where their love and their power could bring about real change. With newfound determination, Cara focused all of her energy, her Etherean powers flowing through the quantum bond they shared. As she did, James felt the pulse of her energy coursing through him, amplifying his every action, sharpening his focus. They were no longer separate. Each move they made, each decision, was shared. Together, they were no longer just two people fighting to survive. They were a force of nature, unstoppable and relentless. As the royal fleet approached, they knew the battle was far from over. But now, they had something they hadn't had before: hope. They weren't facing this challenge alone. The strength of their bond would carry them through, no matter the cost. The Royal Guard attempted to disable their systems, to force them into submission, but they didn't count on the power that James and Cara wielded together. As the enemy ships moved closer, they activated the full extent of their bond, channeling all of their energy into a single, devastating blast. The shock wave from the burst reverberated through the ship, sending out a pulse that disabled the enemy's sensors and systems, buying them precious time. The enemy was stunned, unable to comprehend what had just happened. James and Cara were untouchable, their connection a shield, a weapon, and a source of overwhelming strength. As the guard regrouped, James knew they wouldn't have long. But in that moment, he wasn't afraid. Together, they could face anything. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were fighting to change the world, and their bond was the key to it all. Cara's hand remained in his, her energy pulsing through him, and he knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that they were no longer just fighting for their own survival. They were fighting for freedom, for justice, and for a future where love and connection could break the chains of corruption and oppression. As the battle raged on, James and Cara stood side by side, the power of their bond unyielding. In the face of the greatest challenges they had ever known, they had become more than just allies. They had become one, their love and strength fused into an unstoppable force. Together, they could change everything. And together, they would. The dust had settled, but the air still crackled with the remnants of the battle. The Royal Guard had been pushed back, but the war was far from over. As James and Cara stood together, the gravity of their situation became undeniably clear. They had not only survived, they had overcome. The battle they had fought was not just for their own survival, but for something much larger than themselves. It had been a fight for freedom, justice, and a future that no longer belonged to a corrupt system that had once thought they could control everything. In the aftermath of their victory, the galaxy felt different. The systems they had fought so hard to protect were now fragile, and the threads of power that had once been woven tightly around them were starting to unravel. Yet, for the first time, there was a glimmer of hope, a possibility that the world they had once known could be rebuilt, but this time on their own terms. James and Cara had become the catalysts of change, the spark that would ignite a fire of revolution, one that would burn away the old ways and make space for something new. As they looked out at the ruins of the royal empire, the weight of what they had done hung heavily between them. For Cara, it was more than just the revenge she had longed for against the family who had betrayed her. It was about something deeper, redemption. She had spent years hiding behind her royal bloodline, playing a role she never wanted. The choices she had made were shaped by the system that demanded obedience and subservience. But now, she had been given the chance to rewrite her story. She had reclaimed her identity, her voice, and her destiny. James understood this in a way he hadn't before. He had always fought for himself, for money, for contracts. His loyalty had been bought and paid for, and that was all that mattered. But standing next to Cara, watching the flames of their revolution burn away the old regime, he understood that this fight, their fight, was more than just personal. It was about everything. It was about a new beginning, one that would require more than just the fall of an empire. It would require the rebuilding of a galaxy from the ground up, a galaxy where people like Cara, like him, were no longer bound by the chains of expectation or corruption. In the days that followed their victory, the work began. The rebellion, which had once been nothing more than a scattered few fighting against an oppressive system, began to take shape. The foundations of a new order were being built. But this time, it wouldn't be built on lies or fear. It would be built on honor, trust, and a shared vision for a future where every voice mattered. Cara, though still healing from the emotional and physical toll of the battles they had fought, became the face of this new movement. No longer just a princess, no longer just a symbol of her bloodline, she became a leader in her own right, a leader of the people. She had spent so long being told what to do, being molded into something that served the interests of a corrupt court. But now, with James by her side, she stood as a beacon of hope for all those who had been oppressed, silenced, and forgotten. For James, the path to redemption was not as clear. He had always been the outsider, the mercenary, the one who was never part of the grand schemes of the galaxy. But through Cara, he had found a new purpose. The bond they shared had changed him in ways he couldn't yet fully explain. He had gone from fighting for survival to fighting for something greater, something that didn't just benefit him, but the future of everyone who had been crushed under the boot of the royal court. Their relationship had evolved, too. What had started as a simple alliance between two unlikely companions had grown into something far more profound. Love was not the driving force behind their actions, it was the trust they had in each other, the understanding that together they were more powerful than they could ever be apart. They had become each other's strength, their connection unbreakable, and with that strength, they would lead the galaxy into a new era. But no revolution comes without its price. Enemies still lurked in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. The remnants of the royal guard, those loyal to the old ways, had scattered, but they were not gone. Opposition remained, and those who had once benefited from the corrupt system would not let it fall without a fight. As Cara and James set about securing the new order, the forces that had once held power would stop at nothing to regain control. The challenge they now faced was not just external, but internal. It was about building trust among the very people they had liberated. It was about ensuring that the power they had won would never again be concentrated in the hands of the few, but shared among the many. Equality and freedom were their guiding principles, but maintaining those principles in a galaxy that had been ruled by fear and division for so long would be the greatest test of all. Cara knew that their fight was far from over. The battle they had won was just the beginning. The true war would be in how they rebuilt the galaxy. It would be in the decisions they made, the alliances they formed, and the values they chose to uphold. Revenge had been sweet, But redemption, true redemption, was something far more meaningful. It wasn't just about destroying the old empire, it was about creating something better in its place. A place where the voices of the oppressed were no longer ignored, where the cycles of corruption and abuse were broken for good. James, too, had come to understand the significance of what they were building. The revenge they had taken on the royal court had been necessary, but it was the future they were shaping that mattered most. He no longer saw himself as just a mercenary, fighting for survival and profit. He was a part of something greater, a movement that would reshape the very fabric of the galaxy. As they stood together, looking out over the vast horizon, both James and Cara knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with obstacles. But they also knew that they had something the royal court had never had, each other, and the power of their bond. They had faced the impossible together, and they would continue to do so, leading the galaxy into a new era, where redemption was not just for the few, but for all. The revolution had begun, and with it, a new chapter in their lives. One where they could finally breathe, knowing that they had created something worth fighting for. And as the first rays of a new dawn broke over the horizon, they understood that their true victory was not just in the fall of the old regime, but in the promise of the future they had built, together. In the quiet aftermath of their revolution, with the echoes of war still lingering in the air, James and Cara stood at the precipice of a future neither of them had ever imagined. The fall of the royal empire had been a hard-won victory, but the true test was yet to come. The challenges ahead were not external but internal, they were about the choices they made now, the responsibilities they would inherit, and the world they would build together. The revolution was not an end, it was a beginning. The collapse of the empire had left a void, a gaping chasm where power once resided. Vacuum was a dangerous thing in a galaxy that had been ruled by absolute control for centuries. There was no clear road ahead, no single path to follow. Trust, compromise, and leadership would define the next phase of their journey. Cara had always known her destiny was tied to something greater than herself. As a princess, she had been trained to rule, to lead, to make decisions that impacted the lives of millions. But in her heart, she had never wanted to inherit the throne of a kingdom built on corruption and control. Now, with the empire's fall, the throne was empty, and Cara was left standing before a galaxy that was looking to her for answers. The weight of the choices she had made, the decisions she now had to make, loomed large on her shoulders. Was she ready to rebuild the galaxy on her own terms, or would the same cycles of power and abuse begin again? James, too, was faced with a test of his own. He had come so far, from a mercenary with little to lose to the partner of a revolutionary leader. He had once lived only for himself, focused on survival in a galaxy that had shown him the worst of humanity. But through Cara, he had discovered a different way of living. He had seen the power of love, of sacrifice, and of fighting for something greater than just one's own survival. And yet, now that the war was over, James found himself standing at a crossroads. His relationship with Cara had deepened in ways he couldn't have imagined. But with the fall of the Empire, their personal journey was intertwined with the fate of the galaxy. Could he remain true to the values they had fought for, or would he, too, fall prey to the same temptations that had destroyed the old regime? Together, they stood on the edge of this new world, knowing that their connection, their shared bond, would be the cornerstone of what came next. The challenges ahead would not just be about leading, they would be about healing. The wounds of the galaxy were deep, entire populations had been crushed under the weight of an empire built on lies, oppression, and greed. And the people they had freed were looking to them not just for a new order, but for guidance, for hope that they could rebuild, that they could overcome the darkness that had held them captive for so long. As they stood in the aftermath, facing the scope of the world they had inherited, they realized that the revolution had been about more than just the collapse of an empire. It was about creating a world where all voices could be heard, where justice wasn't just a concept but a tangible reality for those who had never known it. And as daunting as it was, Cara and James knew they had a unique opportunity, a chance to create something better, a chance to define the future in a way that honored the sacrifices of those who had fought beside them. The people they had fought for had witnessed their courage, their sacrifices, and their unwavering commitment to each other. And now, as their future together loomed ahead, James and Cara knew that the choices they made would have lasting repercussions, not just for them, but for generations to come. The legacy they left would either continue to foster freedom and equality or lead to the same kind of control and oppression that they had just destroyed. As they made their way through the newly freed territories, Cara began to understand the full depth of her responsibility. It wasn't just about being a figurehead, a symbol of resistance. It was about governing, about leading with integrity and compassion. The people who had risen up, who had supported their cause, would look to her for guidance. And the world they would create would depend on how she chose to wield the power she now held. It wasn't just power over others, it was power to create opportunities, to rebuild systems of justice and fairness, to heal wounds, and to give the people the freedom they had always deserved. And yet, Cara knew that to build a future on those values, she would need help. She could not do it alone. It would require the support of those who had stood beside her, those who believed in the vision they had shared. It would require James, the man who had not only fought for her but had become her partner in every sense of the word. Together, they had become something greater than just two individuals. They had become the leaders of a movement, one that transcended species, one that brought together different races and worlds under the banner of unity and freedom. James, too, understood his role. He was no longer just a mercenary, no longer just a soldier for hire. He had fought beside Cara because he believed in her, because he saw in her the strength and resilience that the galaxy needed. But now, as they faced the future together, he realized that the fight wasn't over. It wasn't just about defeating the Royal Guard, it was about defeating the legacy of the old system, the corruption that had poisoned the galaxy for so long. He would stand by Cara's side, but he also understood that his own journey of redemption was far from complete. He had to prove that the revolution wasn't just about taking down an empire, it was about building something lasting, something true. As they faced the challenges of this new beginning, both Cara and James knew that their bond, their connection, would be the guiding force that would carry them through. The world would not change overnight, and there would be setbacks and failures along the way. But in each other, they had found something irreplaceable, a partnership that was built on trust, love, and a shared commitment to a future where justice and equality would finally be within reach. And as they stood together, hand in hand, facing the vast expanse of the future, they knew that they would face whatever came next, not as individuals, but as a united force. Together, they had faced the worst the galaxy could throw at them, and together, they would shape the future. This was their new beginning. And they would face it with the strength of their bond, with the hope that one day, the galaxy would look back on their fight and remember that even the darkest moments can give birth to the brightest futures.